Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a video that I have been so looking forward to, and that is on masculinity in fantasy. Today I'm going to be talking about 6 different worlds. I'm going to be talking about 12 male characters and we're going to run through every single one of them and talk about how masculinity is represented. This is a topic that I'm personally very interested in, partly because of, what we're seeing in the world today, also because literature can provide an idealistic view sometimes of what we expect from one another. So we're not going to just be looking at the stoic sword swinger, but we're going to be looking at it on the full spectrum of vulnerability, service, so you have been mourned, faith, self-mastery, and yes, the classic archetypes that still anchor so many stories. In each world, I will pair 2 men, one whose masculinity is more layered and self-aware, and one whose masculinity is a more traditional archetype that tends to be more decisive, status-oriented, or sometimes even like a lone wolf character. I want to make it very clear, neither of these is automatically better than the other. The contrast is the point. It shows what each author thinks strength looks like in their world. And I just want to say here that while this sort of conversation can go into politics, I don't really want it to veer into that in this video. This isn't meant to be like a political essay about gender identity or anything like that. I just want to talk about how different characters embody kind of more masculine traits and what that even means in the context of these series. So let's try to not talk about politics. Like, this isn't what this video is about. There might be another video that I do in the future that is a bit more political in nature, but let's just talk about fantasy specifically and take it from there. Please be respectful as always. If anybody is rude, I will just ban you and remove your comments, because I don't want this video to kind of veer into anything that's going on in the world today. Before I fully jump in, I will just say that the 6 worlds that I picked are like pretty popular in fantasy. I picked stories that I've talked about a lot on my channel because yes, I could talk about some more niche stories, but today I actually really wanted to kind of unpack some of the more popular ones that a lot of us have already read. So now let's actually kick off. So the first one that I'm going to be talking about is the First Law world. And in this one, we're going to have a look at Logan Ninefingers versus Shivers, 2 of my favorite characters in the First Law world. 2 characters who go through a lot of change by the end of their respective arcs. As we all know, Abercrombie's world is cynical and brutal. Survival shapes the character's identity. Logan is very much a self-aware survivor. As we all know, he's the legend, the Bloody Nine. But what's compelling is the way that he interrogates that legend. He treats fear as information, not shame. He's the guy who's seen enough blood to know that the bravest move sometimes is walking away. His masculinity is pragmatic and honest, competent as well, but it's coupled with humility about limits and consequences. He tries to be present for his friends, to avoid needless fights, and to also own up to what he's done. And that honesty is a kind of courage. The other thing I really love about Logan is that he's actually a very sensitive character. There are a couple of times throughout the series where he has some very emotional moments, particularly with other male characters. And I think he's the sort of character that really knows and understands himself better than anybody else in this world. I'm going to also provide quotes for each character, and this one I think summarizes Logan up really well. Fear can bring you out alive, and that's the very best anyone can hope for from any fight. And I couldn't agree more. And now let's move on to Shivers. Shivers for me is the perfect example of hope hardened into vengeance. He starts as a man who wants to be better. He has hope. He's idealistic. In a kinder world, that desire might actually bloom into something incredibly positive. But in this world, betrayals stack up. He gets ground down by everything that's happening around him. He trades openness for armor, and he equates toughness with wisdom. And that's a very, very familiar archetype. The man who adapts to cruelty by becoming hard, even when it costs him his soul. And even then, Shivers doesn't completely lose his soul, but by the end of his arc, he is a very different man to who he was in the first couple of books. And he is, in my opinion, a warning about what happens when pain rewires your values. And as for the quote, great folk are great because they plant new footsteps. And I think that's the problem that Shivers finds himself in, is that he's not able to plant new footsteps by the end of his arc. His arc, in my opinion, is actually one of the most tragic ones because of where we see him from the start all the way up until where he ends. Now I'm going to talk about a pretty controversial series by people who don't really know much about it, and that is the Second Apocalypse by R. Scott Baker. And in this one, I'm going to be talking about Achaemenn versus Anasarimba Kellus. This world is all about philosophy, prophecy, and war. Power is knowledge, and knowledge is often weaponized. Let's talk a little bit about Achaemenn, and to me, he represents doubt with empathy. He's a mandate sorcerer who lives with nightmares and moral uncertainty. He questions power even when he's a part of it, which is quite rare, I would say, for a lot of fantasy characters. His masculinity is the courage to doubt, to love, to admit he doesn't have all the answers, and to keep acting anyway. He shows how tenderness and skepticism can coexist with competence. And this is actually why Achaemenn is actually one of my favourite characters in that world, because I think he's very self-aware, maybe a bit too self-aware sometimes, and he's always questioning those around him. He's always holding people to account. As it relates to a quote, "To be ignorant is to be a slave of the world. To be deceived is to be the slave of another man." And that is one of my favourite quotes of all time, not just from literature. It's so true, and more people need to take heed of that. Let's talk about Kellus now. He is very much a hyper-competent kind of command, right? He's the archetype turned up to about 1,000. He's charismatic, he's surgical, he's terrifyingly effective at what he does. He reads people as if their faces are code to be solved, and control is his grammar. That's his language. That's what he uses to manipulate those around him. This is the familiar fantasy ideal around unflinching mastery, but Baker frames it as a philosophical experiment. What is left of man when empathy becomes just another lever? And I think when you contrast these two male characters, they couldn't be more different. To me, Achaemenn is all about truth and courage, even though he doesn't always get it right, whereas Kellus is all about control and manipulation. So two very different views of what it means to be a man, and both optimizing for very different outcomes. As it relates to Kellus's quote, "We seek absolute awareness, the self-moving thought." Let's move on to the next one, and that is The Black Company by Glenn Cook. I've read the first book, so I can only speak for the first book for now, whereas the others I've read all the books. But even just in this first book alone, you can tell some really marked differences between Croker, who is our narrator, and also Raven. The world is a mercenary company where loyalty and memory very much hold the centre of the story. Croker is a doctor, a historian, and his job is to keep men alive and telling their stories honestly. That reframes masculinity as service, tending wounds, maintaining morale, recording truth even when it hurts. He is brave, but the bravery is often quiet, choosing restraint, choosing to witness. And as it relates to a quote, Croker actually says this to another character. He says, "Evil is relative. Evil depends on where you are standing." And I feel like that's such a historian thing to say. Whereas we have Raven, who is the lone wolf, and he is the company's cold edge. He's lethal, he's private, he's very self-contained. The guys don't really know much about him, and that's a very recognizable masculine archetype. Competence without the community price. He saves people, yes, but very much on his terms. Intimacy is scarce. Vengeance is his language, his primary language. He throws Croker's ethic into relief. And again, two very, very different characters. But the one that I personally get drawn to is the one like Croker, because even though Raven is very good at what he does, there's something to be said for a person who has empathy. There is something to be said for a man who takes ownership over his decisions, but does them in a way that has some sort of moral lens to it, if you know what I mean. Like, he's not just making selfish decisions, he's trying to do what is best not only for himself but also the company, which I think is something that can only be admired. In terms of a quote about Raven, this isn't one that he says, but it's about him. "Raven is an asset in any game. One eye cheats, but never when Raven is playing." And that goes to show how kind of intelligent Raven is, how nobody would try to screw him over or betray him because of how lethal he is as a weapon. Whereas Croker, people want to speak with him, they want to spend time with him because not only is he empathetic, not only does he have some sort of like moral boundary, but he's also somebody who actually genuinely cares about the people around him, which is the complete antithesis to Raven. Let's talk about one of my favourite fantasy series, or I should say books, because I've only read the first one, but it very much functions like a standalone, and that is the Curse of Shallon by Lois McMaster Bujold. And in this one, we're going to be talking about Kazaril versus Dondo. The world of Shallon is political fantasy with living gods, and endurance and grace are ultimately what kind of really carry the story. Kazaril really to me is very much the representation of endurance, service and grace. He is a war-scarred survivor who leads by humility. He accepts pain without bitterness, keeps faith with the people under his care, and embodies the idea that masculinity can be gentle and immovable at once. His strength is in saying, I will bear this and I will not let it make me cruel. And I think that's one of the things that I love most about Kaz, and that's why he's one of my favourite characters of all time, because he has honour, like he has a real sense of duty, not only to the people around him, but to himself, because he doesn't want to do anything that would make him question himself, which I think is equally important, to be honest, is being able to be true to yourself and to be able to look yourself in the mirror. And that is what Kaz can do because he's very honourable. And a quote that I have for him, men have always a choice, if not whether, then how they may endure. And I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about Dondo now, and he's very much the representation of status, appetite and spectacle, the complete antithesis in every way. He's charm, access and appetite, the courtly operator whose masculinity is measured in influence and indulgence. It's a very familiar face at court, jokes as weapons, favours as currency, power as seduction. He is the archetype that Kaz is meant to resist. And as for a quote, every enemy of Dondo's will be there. It's going to be a remarkable event to behold. It's because nobody likes the type of character that Dondo is, or type of man that Dondo is. He's slimy, he's snivelly, nobody wants to be around him, nobody likes him because he's only in it for himself, and nobody wants to be around someone like that. At least nobody sane does, at the very least. Okay, let's move on to number 5, and we have A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. And in this one, we're going to compare Ged versus Jasper. And Earthsea treats power as balance and identity, and names are a really key part of this narrative. Ged, for me, is the perfect representation of self-mastery over conquest. He begins proud and reckless. He literally unleashes a shadow of himself, and his arc reframes masculinity as integration, owning your darkness so it can't own you. And this, I would say, Ged almost actually has some parallels to Logan as well, because I think Logan has a similar arc, but obviously they are very different backstories. Le Guin's answer to the fantasy arms race is restraint. You don't need bigger spells. You need to become whole yourself as a person. This is a quote about Ged. Knowing his whole true self, he cannot be used or possessed by any power other than himself, which that's the sort of self-mastery that I want. You know, like that's a level of self-mastery that is very honorable, because by knowing your own limits and by knowing your own self, you can also then know how to help the other people around you as well. Whereas Jasper, he is very much all about kind of status and pride as identity. He's the polished rival who goads Ged, a familiar school rival archetype, talent plus vanity. We've seen it in many, many stories time and time again. I would say he's less a villain than a catalyzing mirror. Through him, we see how pride can narrow someone's life. And we can see how if you don't have even a degree of self-mastery, you can fall into that trap of letting your ego be the number one focus. As for a quote about Jasper, he knew now that Jasper was far beneath him, no rival, but a mere servant of Ged's destiny. And I think this is also an important point. Sometimes you need people, characters like the Jaspers of the world, for the more kind of well-rounded individual for them to realize their full potential, right? And I think this story is a particularly good representation of that. Lastly, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite fantasy series. To be honest, I love all the series on this list, so yeah, if you haven't read any of these, you need to, regardless of my characterization of masculinity in them. Like, they're all just fantastic. I think I have reviews of pretty much all of them apart from The Black Company, which will be coming out soon. Let's finish off with the David trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. And in this one, we're going to talk about Ali versus Mutadia, who is his brother. In this world, it's full of court intrigue, sect and tribal politics, faith and conscience in collision. Ali is the perfect representation of faith, empathy and duty to the weak. Prince Ali Zaid, i.e. Ali, is devout and very compassionate. He pays for it politically, but he won't abandon his conscience. His masculinity says, care first, even when the cost is exile or scorn. He's proof that gentleness can be steel. He is one of my favorite characters as well of all time because he's such a complex character. Like, he has so much, again, self-awareness, but he has a lot of vulnerability and a lot of strength. But because of what other people put on him, he doesn't always fully believe in that. As for a quote, she told me to keep myself whole. There wasn't any shame in taking care of yourself in order to help those who needed you, which is exactly what I said earlier. Then we have Mutadia, who is very much a pragmatist of power. He's the consummate political animal, charming, burdened and intensely pragmatic. It's a classic courtly masculine role. Protect the house, keep the peace, make the hard calls. His warmth exists, but it filters through duty and optics. As for a quote, those who look on politics with contempt are usually the first to be dragged down by them. And that's, I would say, to some degree true. The thing about Mutadia is that I think he actually raises a lot of really valid points, but because of his ego and because of his insecurity often getting in the way, he comes off a little bit too much, if you know what I mean. Like, he often doesn't give people choices. He's often forcing people to do what he wants them to do. And, you know, that is definitely a version of masculinity, but it's probably a version of masculinity that some people do not like. Whereas Ali is much more collaborative. He's much more open-minded and forthright. Whereas Mutadia is just kind of doing what he needs to do in dark corners, if you know what I mean. So both have very different approaches, not saying necessarily one is better than the other or one is worse than the other, but just very different ways to approaching different situations. I personally prefer the way Ali does it because he sees things that even Mutadia doesn't see because he's not just thinking about himself. So there's that too. All right, so when we line all of these characters up, some patterns pop up. First, the source of strength shift by subgenre. In grimdark, survival, honesty, like Logan's, reads as wisdom. In high fantasy, power that masters itself, like Ged, is the ideal. In political fantasy, strength is often reframed as endurance and service. We look at Kaz and Ali. Second, the traditional archetypes remain magnetic because they promise clarity. Shivers, Raven, Dondo, Mutadia, decisive, independent, effective. But clarity can also calcify when pain becomes identity or duty becomes the only morality. Choices shrink, not only for the characters themselves, but for the people around them. That's why authors pair them with foils. Croker's care complicates Raven's lone wolf ethos. Achamian's doubt humanizes Kellis's command. Third, the healthy masculine throughline isn't softness versus strength, just to be very clear. It's all about integration. Admit fear but act for Logan. For Achamian, it's doubt power but love people. For Croker, choose community over glory. For Kaz, endure with grace. For Ged, master the self. And for Ali, let faith serve mercy, not just try. Meanwhile, the archetypal foil tests that integration. Can you hold values under pressure? If not, you drift toward hardness, status, and or control. So masculinity in fantasy isn't a single status. It's a spectrum of strategies for living under pressure. The best stories make those strategies collide and ask us which costs we're willing to pay. So I'm really curious to hear what you think about these characters and any other characters that you'd like to add to this list. I am actually going to do a second part to this, and I also want to do another version of this focusing on femininity as well, because I think both are equally valuable discussions to have. So tell me down below in the comments which characters for you embody powerful layered masculinity and who is a compelling example of the classic archetype. Drop your picks for a part 2, and I may feature them in my video. And if you like this type of video, please do consider subscribing, give this video a like, as I will be doing more deep dives into themes and characters, because I love these types of videos and I think a lot of you do too. And with that in mind, I'll see you in my next one. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay safe as always, take care, and I'll see you very, very soon.